From this perspective, the work of the street sweeper is no less useful than that of the violinist, and its lower estimation arises out of its inner quality as mere labor, out of the lower condensation of labor energies in it. This shows, however, that this presupposition was too simple and that the diversity of external utility did not allow the distinctions in the evaluation of labor to be independent of their merely internal determinations. If one could create and produce from the world the useless labor, or more accurately the differences in the usefulness of labor, and show that labor is more or less useful to precisely the same extent to which it is more or less concentrated and uses energy, in a word is a greater or lesser amount of labor, then it would certainly be demonstrated that physical labor is still not the sole creator of value. However, labor as such could then exist as the standard of value of objects, since its other element, that of utility, would always be the same and the value relations would no longer alter. Yet differences in utility do indeed exist, and it is a fallacy to reverse the postulate that is perhaps ethically groundable in the statement that all value is labor into the one all labor is value, that is, of equal value. This demonstrates the fundamental connection between the labor theory of value and socialism, for socialism in fact strives for a constitution of society in which the utility value of objects, in relation to the labor time applied to them, forms a constant. In the third volume of Capital, Marx argues that the precondition of all value, of the labor theory too, is use value. Yet this means that so many parts of the total social labor time are used in each product as come in relation to its importance in use. It thus presupposes a qualitative unified total societal need. Accordingly, to the motto of the labor theory, that labor is indeed labor and as such is of equal value, is here added the further motto, that need is indeed need and as such of equal value, and the equivalence of utility for all labor is reached only in so far as only that amount of labor is performed in each sphere of production that exactly covers the part of each need that is circumscribed by it. On the basis of this presupposition, of course, no labor would be less useful than any other. For if one holds, for example, that today piano playing is a less useful task than locomotive construction, then the reason for this lies merely in the fact that more time has been applied to it than the real need subsequently required. If it were limited to the measure outlined here, then it would be just as valuable as locomotive construction, just as the latter would also be useless if one applied more time to it, that is, built more locomotives than are subsequently needed. In other words, there is, in principle, no distinction in use value at all. For if a product momentarily possesses less use value than another, that is, if the labor applied to the former is less valuable than that applied to the latter, then one can simply continue to reduce labor to its category, that is the quantity of its production, until the need for it is just as great as that of the other object, that is until the industrial reserve army is completely wiped out. Only under these conditions can labor truly express the amount of value of a product. The essence of all money, however, is its unconditional interchangeability, the internal uniformity that makes each piece exchangeable for another, according to quantitative measures. For there to be labor money, labor must create this interchangeability, and this can occur only in the manner already described, that is, it creates exactly the same degree of utility, and this, in turn, is attainable only by the reduction of labor for each production need to that amount by which the subsequent need is exactly as great as that of any other. Of course, in so doing the actual labor time could be valued still higher or lower. But now one would be certain that the higher value, derived from the greater utility of the product, indicated a proportionally more concentrated amount of labor per hour. Or conversely, it would be the case that as long as the hour partook of a higher value in the concentration of labor, it would also contain a higher amount of utility. However, this obviously presupposes a completely rationalized and providential economic order in which each labor activity regularly resulted from the absolute knowledge of needs and the labor requirements for each product, that is, an economic order such as socialism strives for. The approximation to this completely utopian state of affairs seems to be technically possible only if, as a whole, only the immediately essential, unquestionably basic life necessities are produced. For where this is exclusively the case, one work activity is of course precisely as necessary and as useful as the next. In contrast, however, as long as one moves into the higher spheres in which, on the one hand, need and estimation of utility are inevitably more individual and, on the other, the intensity of labor is more difficult to prove, no regulation of the amounts of production could bring about a situation in which the relationship between need and labor applied was everywhere the same. On these points, all the threads of the deliberations on socialism intertwine. At this point it is clear that the cultural danger with reference to labor money is in no way so direct as it is usually judged to be. Rather, it stems from technical difficulties in holding constant the utility of things, as its basis for evaluation in relation to labor and as its agent of value, a difficulty that increases in relation to the cultural level of the product and a difficulty whose avoidance, of course, must limit production to that of the most primitive, most essential and most average objects. This result of labor money, however, throws light most clearly upon the nature of money as such. The importance of money lies in the fact that it is a unit of value that is clothed in the plurality of values. Otherwise, the quantitative differences in the unit of money would not be equivalently experienced as the qualitative differences of things. However, this often occurs in a quite unjust manner and personal values are specifically attired in a power that extinguishes their nature. Labor money strives to escape from this condition of money and wishes to undermine money with a concept that, though it is certainly even more abstract, is nonetheless closer to concrete existence. By means of labor money and eminently personal, one could even say, the personal value would become the standard of value as such. And yet it is clear that labor money, because it should nonetheless possess the qualities of all money, unity, fungibility, universal validity, would be more threatening to the differentiation and personal creation of life's contents than money as it already exists. If it is the incomparable power of money not to oppose the exact opposite of a desired result, if we see it serve on the one hand the suppression and on the other the often much exaggerated accentuation of personal differentiation, then it denies the attempt to make it both more concrete and even more general, it denies the attempt to establish its position, as it were, above the parties and places it on the one side of the alternative to the exclusion of others. However much one must recognize the tendency for labor money to place money back into a closer relationship to personal values, each consequence nonetheless shows how closely the hostility to this is bound up with its essence. Chapter 6. The Style of Life. The preponderance of intellectual over emotional functions brought about by the money economy. We have frequently mentioned in these investigations that intellectual energy is the psychic energy which the specific phenomena of the money economy produces, in contrast to those energies generally denoted as emotions or sentiments which prevail in periods and spheres of interest not permeated by the money economy. Above all, this is the consequence of money's character as a means. All means as such imply that the conditions and concatenations of reality are incorporated in the process of our will. They are possible only because we possess an objective image of actual causal relationships, and certainly a mind that commands a perfect view of the total situation would also master the most appropriate means for every purpose and from every starting point. Yet this intellect that had a perfect knowledge of the appropriate means would not yet be able to transpose them into reality because their use is dependent on setting a purpose, only in relation to which those actual energies and connections acquire the status of means. For its part, a purpose can be created only by an act of will. Just as nothing is purposeful in the objective world unless there is a will, so too in the intellectual world, which is only a more or less perfect representation of the content of the world. It has been correctly stated, but mostly misunderstood, that the will is blind. The will is not blind in the same sense as Hodder or the blinded Cyclops who rush at a venture. The will does not produce anything irrational, in the sense of the value concept of reason. Rather, it is unable to effect anything at all unless it gains some kind of content that is completely external to it. For by itself, the will is nothing but one of the psychological forms, such as being, duty or hope, etc., which make up the content of our life. It is one of those categories probably realized psychologically by concomitant muscular or nervous reactions, by which we comprehend the ideal content of the world in order to give it a practical significance for us. Just as the will, the mere name of the form raised to a certain